There's a moment that happens when someone with an unshakable mind walks into a room. You've felt it before. The air shifts. Conversations pause. Not because they're loud or demanding attention, but because their presence carries a weight that others instinctively recognize. Their thoughts don't scatter like leaves in the wind. Their emotions don't control them. Their sense of self doesn't depend on your approval. This isn't about intimidation through force. It's about the quiet power that emerges when a human being has done the one thing most people never do: face themselves completely. Carl Jung, the revolutionary Swiss psychologist who peered deeper into the human psyche than perhaps anyone before, described this journey perfectly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Today, we're exploring how to build a mind so formidable, so integrated, and so self-aware that it naturally commands respect, even fear, from those still running from their own shadows. This isn't about psychological tricks or manipulation tactics. It's about the authentic power that emerges when you've done the work that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The path Jung outlined isn't easy. In fact, he warned, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. But on the other side of that pain lies a version of yourself that few humans ever achieve. Someone who has integrated both their light and darkness into a whole that can no longer be manipulated, controlled, or swayed by the opinions of others. Let's begin. The shadow. Confronting what terrifies you about yourself. The foundation of Jung's approach to building an unshakable mind starts with a concept that most people find deeply uncomfortable: the shadow. Your shadow isn't simply your negative qualities. It's everything about yourself that you've pushed away, denied, or refused to see. It's the parts of you deemed too aggressive, too sexual, too selfish, too weak, or too strange to acknowledge. Jung didn't mince words about this. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Think about that for a moment. The parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge don't disappear. They grow stronger in the darkness of your unconscious. They emerge in your snap judgments of others, in your inexplicable rage when someone pushes certain buttons, in the aspects of others that trigger you most intensely. The person with a truly formidable mind understands something most never grasp. The qualities you hate most in others are usually the disowned parts of yourself that you've pushed into shadow. As Jung put it, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. This realization alone sets you apart from most people who spend their lives projecting their shadows onto everyone around them, creating enemies out of mirrors. So how do you begin this shadow work? Start by asking yourself, what traits in others trigger me most intensely? Who can I not stand to be around, and why? What accusations do people level against me that I vehemently reject? A person I once worked with couldn't stand attention seekers. He'd become visibly irritated whenever someone would take center stage, calling them narcissistic and desperate. Through shadow work, he eventually recognized his own buried desire for recognition, a need he had deemed shameful and pushed into unconsciousness. Once he acknowledged this part of himself, his irritation with others mysteriously dissolved. Jung believed that in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. Your shadow contains not just your darkness, but untapped strengths, creativity, and power that you've denied yourself access to. When you begin to reintegrate these disowned parts, something remarkable happens. You become less reactive, less triggered, more whole. People sense this integration. They notice that you can't be easily provoked or manipulated through shame, flattery, or social pressure. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls, Jung observed. And this is precisely why a person who has faced themselves completely become so disarming to others. They've done what most refuse to do. The persona, shedding the mask. You show the world while the shadow contains what you hide from yourself. The persona is what Jung described as the mask you wear for others, the compact between the individual and society as to what a person should appear to be. Most people become so identified with their persona that they forget it's merely a social construct. The businessman who can't separate himself from his title, the mother who has no identity beyond her children, the activist whose entire sense of self depends on being seen as righteous. Jung warned about this trap. The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society. Fittingly enough, a kind of mask designed, on the one hand, to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other, to conceal the true nature of the individual. A mind of uncommon strength recognizes the persona for what it is, a necessary social interface, but not who you truly are. This recognition creates an inner freedom that most never experience. I remember speaking with a former executive who had built his entire identity around his corporate position. When he was suddenly laid off after 20 years, he experienced what he described as ego death. His persona had been stripped away, forcing him to confront the emptiness that lay beneath the mask. The subsequent journey to discover who he was beyond his title was excruciating, but ultimately liberating. The first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego. The second half is going inward and letting go of it, Jung noted. This letting go doesn't mean you abandon social functioning. It means you no longer confuse the mask with the wearer. When you've separated yourself from your persona, you develop a strange immunity to social manipulation. Status symbols no longer impress. Peer pressure feels childish. The desperate social climbing and impression management that consumes most people's energy becomes transparent and almost comical. Your authentic self begins to emerge. Not the self you think others want, but the self that exists prior to social conditioning. This authenticity is magnetic, yet deeply unsettling to those still wholly identified with their personas. As Jung put it, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Few actually claim this privilege. Individuation, the path. Most never take at the core of Jung's psychology is the process he called individuation, the journey of becoming a complete, undivided individual. It's the integration of all aspects of yourself, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, rational and intuitive. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people, Jung wrote. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Individuation isn't self-improvement in the conventional sense. It's not about becoming a better version of yourself according to social standards. It's about becoming more fully yourself, embracing the totality of who you are, including the parts society told you to reject. This journey creates a specific kind of courage that is immediately recognizable to others. When you've faced your own demons, external threats lose much of their power. As Jung observed, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. I once witnessed this quiet strength in action during a heated board meeting. While everyone else was either aggressively posturing or shrinking back in fear, one woman remained completely centered. She spoke her truth without defensive energy, acknowledged opposing views without abandoning her position, and didn't seem compelled to prove anything to anyone. The entire dynamic of the room shifted around her stillness. I later learned she had spent years doing intensive inner work following a profound personal crisis. This is the paradox of individuation. By becoming more fully yourself, you become both more unique and more connected to the collective human experience. You recognize the universal patterns playing out in individual lives. You see through the social games without judging the players. As far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Jung wrote, "The individuated person carries this light, not as a performance, but as the natural radiance of an integrated psyche." The power of active imagination and dream. Jung developed specific techniques for accessing the unconscious and integrating its contents. Two of the most powerful are active imagination and dream analysis. Active imagination is a form of deliberate engagement with the unconscious. Rather than passive daydreaming, it involves consciously entering an imaginative state while maintaining awareness. You might start by focusing on an emotion, an image from a dream, or a persistent mood, then allow it to develop into a scene or dialogue with figures from your unconscious. Jung described it as a method of introspection for observing the stream of interior images. Through this practice, you form a living bridge between your conscious and unconscious mind. Dream work was equally central to Jung's approach. The dream is a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul, he wrote. Unlike Freud, who viewed dreams primarily as disguised wish fulfillments, Jung saw them as direct communications from the unconscious, often compensating for conscious attitudes that have become too one-sided. By recording and engaging with your dreams over time, patterns emerge. The unconscious reveals both problems and potential solutions that your conscious mind hasn't grasped. A client once shared a recurring dream of being in a house and discovering new rooms she never knew existed. As we worked with the dream imagery, she recognized it as a metaphor for unexplored aspects of her psyche. Each room represented potential and qualities she hadn't acknowledged. This realization coincided with major life changes as she began to inhabit more of herself. These practices may sound esoteric, but their effect is profoundly practical. They develop a relationship with your unconscious rather than leaving it as an autonomous force that erupts unpredictably into your life. As Jung put it, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside as fate. Someone who has established this relationship carries themselves differently. They're less reactive because they're processing psychic material consciously rather than projecting it outward. They seem to possess an inner compass that guides them through situations that leave others confused or controlled by unconscious impulses. The Transcendent Function, embracing paradox. One of the most powerful aspects of Jung's psychology is what he called the Transcendent Function, the psyche's ability to unite opposing forces within itself to create something new. Most people live in a state of inner division. They identify with certain aspects of themselves while rejecting others. They cling to fixed positions and avoid anything that challenges their established view. The transcendent function emerges when you can hold opposing truths simultaneously without needing to resolve the tension prematurely. Rather than choosing one side of a conflict and suppressing the other, you allow both to exist until a third position emerges that transcends the original opposition. Jung described it as the confrontation of opposites and their synthesis in the transcendent function, from which emerges a new situation or a new level of being. This capacity creates an unusual flexibility of mind. Where others become rigid and dogmatic, you remain fluid and responsive. You don't need to reduce complex realities to simplistic either-or positions. I witnessed this quality in a mediator who could genuinely hold space for completely contradictory viewpoints during heated conflicts. He didn't rush to judgment or force premature resolution. Instead, he created a container where opposing perspectives could both be fully expressed until, almost miraculously, new understanding would emerge that neither party could have reached alone. This ability to embrace Paradox and complexity without falling into confusion is a hallmark of exceptional psychological development. As Jung noted, the greater the contrast, the greater the potential. Great energy only comes from a correspondingly great tension between opposites. Developing psychological immunity. When you've done this level of inner work, you develop what I call psychological immunity, a resistance to manipulation, groupthink, and emotional contagion. This immunity doesn't come from building walls or becoming cold. It comes from knowing yourself so thoroughly that external attempts to define you or control you through unconscious triggers simply don't work anymore. Jung put it this way: your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Consider how rare this quality is. Most people are constantly influenced by their social environment in ways they don't even recognize. They adopt opinions without realizing where they came from. They're swayed by emotional appeals that bypass their rational faculties. Their self-worth fluctuates based on external validation. A psychologically immune individual stands in stark contrast. They can enter charged environments without absorbing the prevailing emotional state. They can consider unpopular ideas without fear. They can receive criticism without defensiveness and praise without inflation. I once observed this quality in a colleague during an organizational crisis. While everyone else was caught in a contagious panic, she maintained a calm clarity that at first seemed almost inhuman. It wasn't that she was unaffected. She felt the gravity of the situation. But she wasn't controlled by the collective emotional field. Her responses came from a centered place rather than reactive fear. Jung believed that this kind of psychological development was not just personally beneficial, but socially essential. The salvation of the world consists in the salvation of the individual soul. The collective unconscious and archetypal power. Beyond the personal unconscious lies what Jung called the collective unconscious, a deeper layer of the psyche containing universal patterns and images he termed archetypes. These include the hero, the shadow, the anima, animus, the wise old man, woman, and many others. The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual. Jung wrote, "A mind of uncommon power has consciously engaged with these archetypal energies rather than being unconsciously possessed by them. This engagement grants access to transpersonal resources and wisdom that transcend individual experience. When you recognize archetypal patterns operating in yourself and others, social dynamics become transparent in a way that can be almost unsettling to witness. You see how people unconsciously embody archetypal roles in relationship to each other and how these patterns repeat across different contexts. A business leader I worked with described how his understanding of archetypes transformed his approach to organizational dynamics. Rather than seeing conflicts as merely personal, he recognized archetypal energies at play, the rebel challenging the king, the trickster disrupting stagnant systems, the mother nurturing new initiatives. This perspective allowed him to work with these energies consciously, rather than being caught in their unconscious expression. In each of us, there is another whom we do not know, Jung wrote. By becoming familiar with these archetypal dimensions of yourself, you tap into sources of insight and energy that most people never access consciously. The price of consciousness. Building this kind of mind comes at a cost. Jung was clear about this. There is no birth of consciousness without pain. The path involves facing aspects of yourself that may be difficult to acknowledge. It requires giving up comforting illusions and sometimes standing apart from collective certainties. It means tolerating the discomfort of not knowing and the solitude that can come with seeing what others don't yet see. Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself, Jung observed. As your consciousness develops, you may find periods where you feel out of step with conventional thinking, but the alternative, remaining unconscious, ultimately exacts a higher price. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls, Jung noted. This avoidance doesn't prevent suffering. It merely ensures that suffering occurs unconsciously through symptoms, projection, and patterns of self-sabotage. The integrated mind chooses conscious suffering over unconscious suffering, the pain of growth over the pain of stagnation. There's a profound liberation in this choice. Living from the self, not the ego, at the center of Jung's psychology is the distinction between the ego and the self. The ego is your conscious identity, who you think you are. The self, with a capital S, is the organizing center of the entire psyche, both conscious and unconscious. The ego stands to the self as the move to the mover, or as object to subject, Jung wrote. The ego isn't meant to be destroyed, but rather to come into proper relationship with the larger self. When your ego recognizes that it's not the whole of who you are, that it's a satellite orbiting a much larger center, a profound shift occurs. You stop identifying exclusively with your conscious personality and open to guidance from a deeper source. This shift manifests as a distinctive quality of presence. Those who have experienced it often describe a sense of being lived by something larger, rather than striving to control life through ego effort alone. A spiritual teacher I interviewed described his experience. Before, it felt like I was living my life, a separate self navigating a foreign world. Now it feels like life is living itself through this form. The separate self was an optical illusion created by identifying with only a fragment of the whole. Jung put it this way: I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. This choice, paradoxically, involves surrendering the ego's imagined control to align with the larger intelligence of the self. The alchemy of psychological transformation. Jung was fascinated by alchemy, seeing in its symbolic language a perfect metaphor for psychological transformation. The alchemist's pursuit of turning lead into gold paralleled the psyche's process of transmuting unconscious content into consciousness. Like alchemy, psychological development follows specific stages: nigredo, blackening, facing the shadow; albedo, whitening; insight and illumination; rubedo, reddening, integrating new consciousness into life. The alchemist saw the union of opposites under the symbol of the tree, and it is therefore not surprising that the unconscious of present day, man, who no longer feels at home in his world and can base his existence neither on the past that is no more, nor on the future that is yet to be, should hark back to the symbol of the cosmic tree rooted in this world and growing up to heaven, Jung wrote. This alchemical perspective transforms how you view life's challenges. Difficulties aren't just obstacles to happiness. They're the prima materia, the raw material needed for your transformation. Nothing is wasted. Everything becomes fuel. For the process, I worked with a woman who had experienced severe childhood trauma. Through years of inner work, she didn't just recover. She transformed her wounds into exceptional empathic abilities and psychological insight that now benefit many others. As she described it, "I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone, but I also wouldn't trade what those experiences have made possible in me." Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart, Jung wrote. This clarity of vision is what ultimately sets apart a mind of extraordinary development. When you've faced your shadow, recognized your persona, engaged with the archetypes, and aligned your ego with the self, you develop a presence that others immediately sense. It's not an aggressive power that demands recognition, but a contained strength that needs no external validation. This integration manifests as a natural authority that has nothing to do with position or title. People instinctively trust those who know themselves, perhaps because such self-knowledge is so rare. Jung believed that real change happens through individuals, not systems. The world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man. In a world of increasing complexity and polarization, minds capable of holding paradox, staying centered amid chaos, and resisting unconscious manipulation become increasingly valuable. Building such a mind isn't about achieving perfection or reaching some final state. As Jung emphasized, the meaning of my existence is that life has addressed a question to me, or conversely, I myself am a question which is addressed to the world, and I must communicate my answer, for otherwise I am dependent upon the world's answer. Your answer will be unique to you. The work of consciousness is not about conforming to an external ideal, but about becoming more fully who you already are beneath the conditioning and defenses. In a world where most remain strangers to themselves, those who have undertaken this journey carry a quiet power that both inspires and unsettles others. They model a different way of being human, not perfect, but more whole, more awake, more alive to both the light and shadow within. As Jung put it, with characteristic depth, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. The choice is yours.